Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today for the Engaging Student series. Today's session is Too Much or Not Enough, quantifying the time students spend in engaging courses. My name is Amy Kuntz, and I'm an instructional designer with Teaching and Learning with Technology. We also have today Sarah Kettle from Penn State Harrisburg, and she'll be doing kind of a 2/3 towards the end of the session. She'll be doing some aspects and chiming in. And before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about the Engaging Student series. So this is actually the 6th in a series for focusing on engaging students in virtual environments, whether it's asynchronous online courses or synchronous through Zoom. This is the second new topic from our original 4 offerings, and those original 4 offerings will be offered again if you have not heard about them. And those 4 really focused on the aspects that were covered in TLT's blended learning transformation, and we adapted what was covered in the blended learning transformation program to the specific topics in the Engaging Student series. And this way that we're giving you some tools and some tips that will help you engage your students in either remote or blended or adapted environments as we plan for an uncertain fall semester. So if you are new to the Engaging Student series, our format is very much the same across all the sessions. What we do is we have brief presentations mixed with participant feedback as well as breakout groups. So for those breakout groups, we'll break out into smaller groups and specific breakout rooms through Zoom, and we'll have an instructional designer or someone else in each breakout group to help dialogue and ask questions if need be. So we will also have a 5-minute break about 2/3 of the way through, depending upon our pacing and timing. As we know, 2 hours can be lengthy, but we've found that 2 hours is kind of that perfect middle ground, and people have found these sessions to be engaging as well. Hence the title. So feel free to ask questions throughout using the chat, and if you want to even speak and ask your question, please raise your hand. So if you click on the participant button at the bottom of the panel, from there you'll be able to see a list of participants, and at the bottom of the participant panel is the raise hand button. So by the end of today's session, we hope that you'll be able to discuss the benefits and strategies for reviewing the time spent on instructional activities for students, apply different tools and resources that we'll go over in detail to estimate the hours of instructional activity in a course, integrate planning strategies to help minimize homework overload with context as to why, and then help facilitate conversations with your students as far as how much time should they be spending on the course, how your course is rigorous, but not too rigorous as far as what is needed for gaining that credit hour. So why do we even need to quantify student time? There's kind of 3 different prongs to this. The first being the parity of instruction, and we'll go into each of these in more detail, and making sure that no matter what course modality a particular course is taught, that it is the same amount of time students will spend on an in-person class versus a Zoom class versus one that is completely 100% on Canvas asynchronously. The next is faculty senate policy. So I'm going to do a poll next as far as if you knew that there was a faculty senate policy. It actually is 42-23, and it goes into detail about the right balance of instruction time guided by the facilitator as you as an instructor, as well as the amount of time that students need to prepare by themselves to gain the academic credit. And then lastly, we also have the Pennsylvania State Board of Education has some legislature where we have to abide by those rules for being in the state of Pennsylvania, focusing on higher education. So with that being said, we are going to have our first poll, and what I'm going to do is quickly launch the poll. So out of curiosity, this is anonymous. It's okay if you didn't know about it, but did you know that Penn State Faculty Senate has a policy on time required to receive academic credit? Either A, yes and know it well, B, yes and I'm semi-familiar, maybe, and no, I am unaware of this policy. So results are coming in. We have about, we're getting up there slowly. 84% now have responded. So we'll give it another couple seconds to see if anyone else wants to chime in. Okay, so what are the results? So there actually is one brave soul who yet knows about this and knows it well, but the majority of you, 42% yes and semi-familiar, and then 29% saying maybe, and then 25% saying no, unaware of this policy. So even for myself, I came to Penn State in 2008, and I was unaware of this policy for the first year and a half of being here. I know it's something to be aware of, and students often don't know this as well. And so we'll incorporate some strategies moving forward towards the end of the session of how you can make your students more aware of that. So as we said, the three main pillars for the need for quantifying student time include parity of instruction, the Faculty Senate policy, and the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. So we're going to go into detail just briefly. This is not by any sense of the imagination something intensive, but we are going to post links in the chat for you in case you happen to want to review in more granular detail. So the first is course parity. A course is a course is a course. So when you are making sure that there is parity of instruction, you want to make sure that every MIS 204 at the institution is the same. And so both at Penn State and a prior institution, we were charged with making sure that we did this for accreditation purposes and things of that nature. And it actually stems from the U.S. Department Board of Education Higher Learning Commission. And if you want to read, it is page 60 of this very intensive guide that I posted in chat. And to give you an example, prior to COVID, and this was in the mid-2000s, is I was the manager of instructional technology at a community college in Eastern Pennsylvania. And so they had multiple locations, one in Bethlehem and one in the Poconos, as well as online offerings. So making sure that something was the same at multiple locations in person, as well as the online asynchronous course. And then lastly, video conferencing courses that were from one of the locations to the other. And making sure that the same student learning outcomes were there, the same number of contact hours were there. And then what's also most important is when you deliver that course in the condensed format, especially during summer, that contact hour is appropriately condensed and smushed together. So that is kind of the most basic aspect for that. So that also relates to the Faculty Senate policy. And so for this, the policy states that a typical student should spend about 45 hours of planned work for university credit. And so this is the combination of 1/3 instruction, which typically is meant to be in person, and then 2/3 outside preparation, meaning homework, reading materials, things of that nature. And so if you are interested in reviewing it in detail, that is also posted in the chat. And we'll translate how this comes into practice after we go over the last pillar, which is the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So for this, it's actually a little bit less rigorous than Penn State's policy. And this is 1 credit hour equals 14 hours of instruction. And so that equates to 42 hours. And with that, it couldn't include they have a policy that it can't include the final exam. So with Penn State having that 45 threshold, we kind of circumnavigate and have our own higher standards. And so again, this is a little bit administrative in nature, so we're not going to cover it in detail, but if you are interested, there is the code in the chat, and we will be sharing out those links after today's session. So how does this come into practice? What does this all mean? So there is a key that I'm showing right now. Oftentimes we think of it as online, meaning that you don't join in at the same time, but with the rise of Zoom, even prior to COVID, to having some synchronous online sessions, it's a little bit different. So we have 1 hour of synchronous instruction where you meet up in the same time. It could be in the physical classroom, or where everyone is logging onto the computer through Zoom at the same time. Then we have 1 hour asynchronous instruction, meaning students do this work at their own pace, time of day, typically through Canvas. And then 1 hour of student work, meaning that preparation of homework, textbook readings, etc. So for a 3-credit 15-week course, if you divide 45 by 15, you get the 9 hours per week. So traditional is easy. You have the 3 hours of synchronous instruction and the 6 hours of student preparation work. Next, we have the online week. And so online meaning students go ahead and do all of their work by themselves, because those 3 hours of asynchronous can be done at any time. And with that, they still have to maintain those 6 hours of online preparation. So we want to quickly see what expertise we have here today. So prior to COVID, what I want you to do is, if you've taught an online asynchronous course before, either at your specific college or campus or through World Campus, I want you to press the green check mark. So at the bottom of the participant panel, there is a green check mark for yes and a red X for no. So if you don't have that open, press participants at the bottom and you'll see the participant panel, typically on the right-hand side. And at the bottom of that, you'll see the green and red check mark. So if you have taught an online asynchronous course, press the green check mark. And if not, please press the red X. So we have kind of a good mixture. 7 people have and 13 people or 15 people have not. So yesterday was a little bit more even, about closer to half. So here it seems that we have a little bit more of people who have not. Great, thank you for sharing. So next we have blended courses. So blended courses are known to be the best of both worlds, meaning that it's a mixture of traditional in-person classes as well as online asynchronous classes. So with that, most oftentimes it's a Monday, Wednesday in person, and then Fridays online with that asynchronous work. So you have to make sure that you quantify the time right, and we'll show where it gets kind of fuzzy in the next slide. So just like we did for the online classes, we're curious, have you taught a blended course before, either in person or through synchronous technology through Zoom? If you have, go ahead and press that green check mark, and if you have not, press that red X. Okay, we'll give it another couple seconds.
We've got a question in the chat too.
Okay, perfect. So flipped resident, because there is no reduction of time, it's not. And then oftentimes with blended, you are flipping the classroom, because if you are blending your class and not flipping it, you're kind of probably not doing blended for the right reasons. But I know that doing a flipped classroom approach takes as much time preparation wise. Technically not, but we definitely appreciate your time and efforts to make that flipped instruction. Okay, so we are about even with 10 yeses and 11 nos. Thank you all for that. Okay, so as we said, those were kind of the generic time frames, but we also have this table. So we know that everyone has a 3-credit course. You might even have 4. So this table that has been used historically helps quantify and showcase that time in a 15-week manner. And so the instruction time, which is this bottom of the 3 hours, again, typically that's what you meant in person. And so instruction, you might say, what does that mean? That does include anything where you are lecturing, where you're guiding student activities, where you're sprinkling aspects as far as question and answers. So even in that flipped manner, you still are doing instruction. So how do we calculate the time? The 1 hour synchronous portion is easy. The time that you meet, that's the time that's done. The 1 hour asynchronous, it gets a little bit difficult. If you're going to be doing a discussion board, how much time do students spend on discussion boards? If you are going to have something where it's an online quiz, how much time does that have? And then additionally, with the 1 hour of student work, how fast do students read? If it's a research paper or your textbook, that's two different kind of writing styles and consumption. So what's the pace that students do for that? Later on, after our first breakout group, we are going to be going over these in details and some really great rationale as to what's suggested and why. But before we do that, we want to talk about a little bit more of why we're doing this and maybe some strategies you've already implemented in the past, because we want to learn from you and have you learn from each other as well. So first off, we already mentioned the benefits of parity and adherence to policies, but what else is there? Why else should we do this? When we do move to that blended course format, it's known to gravitate to a course and a half where you accidentally create more work for your students. And so that's really important if you're choosing that modality, to be cognizant of the time that students spend. The other thing is the balance of instruction and outside preparation. You don't want to place too much time where you are giving the information. You want the students to have that active learning and making sure that they're gaining the knowledge themselves. Setting student expectations. I know for many of the first year seminars and the virtual orientations for new student orientation, there's the time management skills that are encouraged by our students and are gained. But then too, the jump from the lower level courses to the upper level courses, and help doing that stigma of, hey, you should be spending 9 hours on every course. So quantifying, saying, hey, we are doing this. This should be 9 hours for this course. It shouldn't be less, is helpful. And then that brings us to the next part of it, addressing comments of workload, difficulty, and pace. So one of the instructors that I worked with to implement a real calculation of this time, he was at one of the locations where unfortunately some of the lower level courses were not as rigorous. So in his discipline, when they got to his class, the students were like, this is way too much work. But he was able to say, hey, no, this is the appropriate amount. This is what's going to prepare you if you decide to pursue education beyond the bachelor's level. And it helps set that expectation for new semesters and new students. And so his reputation of being a hard instructor and too demanding diminished over time, and that he was fair and adequate. And so as far as strategies that you might have used on your own accord, you might have asked students to self-report. How much time were they spending on a course? And it could have been done informally through conversations, as well as through formal mechanisms such as surveys. You might have looked at tracking of students through Canvas, such as data analytics, or even just observations of the time spent on assignments. And then for you, it might have been just an estimation from your perspective, and to see how much students were spending time on that. So what we're going to be doing is our wonderful tech TA who is here today is going to be putting you into breakout groups. And with that, we want you to first take a minute or two to get to know your breakout group and members. We're going to be returning to this group 2 more times throughout today. And after you do those initial introductions, in the next 10 minutes, we want you to share with each other what benefits do you see to quantifying student time. If you've implemented strategies, what strategies have you done and how did it go? And then 3, if you haven't done this before, those last 3 that we talked about as far as student self-reporting, data analytics, and just kind of your perspective. What of those 3 are most interest to you, and what challenges do you think you would face, and how would you circumnavigate them? So what we will be doing, again, is putting you into breakout groups. What I am going to post right now and then share my screen is a place for us to take notes. So this is the overarching document. So if you're in breakout group 1, you'll click on the first link. If you're in breakout group 2, you'll click on the second link, etc. Before we send you off on your way, while we are placing you in groups, I just kind of quickly want to show you what this looks like and the expectations. So if we are in group 6, what you do is you click on that, and from there, it's always good for collegiality and knowing who is there in case you want to reach out in the future. So go ahead and type your name and emails. And then again, you'll be in here for 2 more times. So we're only going to focus on this first part of the breakout one. And so the prompt that I had in the PowerPoint slide is right here for you. So feel free to take notes, but you don't have to, especially for this one. So we want to make sure that you are all confident. So if that makes sense, if you could go ahead and press that green check mark for yes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be everyone, because we'll have you in groups, so then we could have a team member help you out. And so what I will be doing is pausing the. Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. I hope that you had some great discussions in your group. And again, we are going to be putting you back in those groups 2 more times. So that's why we definitely wanted to do some introductions. So I know that we didn't give you a formal task of a debrief. So we are gonna just ask for any brave volunteers who wish to debrief. And if you don't this time, that's okay. But the next 2 times we will have a group leader to designate to report out. So we know that sometimes you might not have, this is kind of sometimes a gray area as far as sharing for this specific subtopic. So if you have implemented any strategies and you want to talk about what you did and how it went, maybe for accreditation purposes, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you to talk about your experiences. Or if you're in that gray area and you don't want to talk and you want to type in the chat, feel free to do so. So yesterday we had 2 brave volunteers. Oh, poor group 1 got cut off. We're talking about some great things. Yeah, so we will be, like I said, putting you back in groups 2 more times. Oh, wow. So great discussion of intros. So we did even give you a 13th minute. Interesting. I did see that there was some notes that were being taken though, for sure. Okay, so moving on. Go ahead. I'll go back. So Eliza, so feel free to talk and share about your experiences.
Oh, you're muted. The unmute button.
Okay, sorry. This is Elisa from the Barrand campus, and our group was talking about some strategies we tried to make sure our students were putting in just enough work. In some cases, like in art or in my computer coding classes, we could have students go obsessive and easily spend too much time per night on something. So we were talking about telling the students to stop after 2 hours, if it's that sort of open-ended kind of thing. But on the other side, there's problems with students really regularly not putting in enough work, so that we might need to build in some self-assessment to, like student self-assessment to say, did you do this, 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 and this? And if you didn't, maybe you should have spent more time. And that was pretty much as far as we got. So.
Oh, that's awesome. And that great as a segue to even students often multitask. So how do we equate to that? And as far as this, knowing that multitasking is a thing. And then lastly, there's some, if you want to kind of extend even further, I know even some faculty at Penn State Lehigh Valley have crafted a syllabus in a way knowing that their students have other expectations, even prior to COVID, as far as work responsibilities, taking care of siblings, things of that nature, where they want to continue and proceed to get their degree, but they might not have the amount of time to put in to get an A. So they even have this adapted syllabus on top of the regular one, where they say, hey, if you want to get an A, you should be doing this, this, and this, and this. But if you know that, hey, you don't have enough time to dedicate that, if you're okay to get a B, then make sure you do this, this, and this. So I think that's some great extended discussions and thinking about that as well. So as you saw when I quickly went to the next slide, but wait, there's more. So why are we here today? So as commercials say, as seen on TV, we are talking about the hours of instructional activity. And so web learning at Penn State, you might have seen as one of the many resources available, and it's linked on the Keep Teaching website. And so this is governed by the Faculty Engagement Subcommittee, who is actually meeting as we speak. And so they help build various resources for faculty, instructional designers, and even for students. And so I'm going to put the generic link in the chat, but we are also going to be talking about the specific tool of the hours of instructional activity. So I'm going to post both the generic link and the hours of instructional activity in the chat. And when you go to the hours of instructional activity, it kind of talks about what we just did. and so I was part of 3 individuals to focus and craft this. And the Faculty Engagement Subcommittee is a mixture of faculty and instructional designers. It's about a 50-50 split, and it's also open to anyone. And so if you are interested after today's session, please reach out to me and I could point you in the direction and get you connected if you are interested in joining. So in addition to meeting monthly for about 2 hours, they do have working groups to create all these various resources. So the hours of instructional activity, it talks about the terminology and why you want to do this. And it talks about that instruction time and outside preparation time that we had mentioned before. It also talks about those timetables. You'll see that this looks familiar, but then this gets into the nitty gritty. As I previously mentioned, how much time does a discussion board take a student? And so this gives you a guideline as far as doing the initial post and response to a question, as well as reading all of the other posts for students and even replying. There also is guidelines as far as reading and how much time that takes, and even media projects. They are going to create an instructional video for a student for an assignment. How much time does that take? So even then, 3 to 5 minutes of minimal production is about 1 to 3 hours of instruction to get that up and ready. So there are some things where it's kind of consuming information, but it also is creating it. And so the reason why they're quantified this way is there was some debate as to, is something really me giving information as an instructor, or is it students creating that knowledge? And so there's some gray areas, so it's written in a way that it's up to you. So if they're crafting it, it's a learning activity. If you're giving a bit of guidance and instruction, it's an instruction activity. So knowing that readings are about consumption, that only has the one choice. And that's broken down to 5 minutes of reading for a scholarly reading and 3 minutes per page for populars. So what we are going to do is, in a minute, we're going to go over a demo, and then we're going to have you and your next breakout group go through this at a high level, so to speak. So we do have some examples of what this equates to. And during yesterday's session, they said, hey, like this is great, but can we compare this to the original course? So as of right now, we don't have the comparison to the original course because these are people who have crafted courses on their own without getting paid, and are always critical and afraid about how their peers would perceive their courses. But someone who is part of Teaching and Learning with Technology, who is a former English instructor for 15 years, has willingly shown her course, and so will craft her hours of instructional activity so it correlates. So that won't be an initial follow-up, but that will be coming down the pike in the next week or so. So with that being said, how did we get those numbers? Did we pull them out of our hat? How did we get there? So this was a multi-pronged effort. The first is that an instructional designer who came to Penn State Harrisburg, who has unfortunately since left, said, hey, what is Penn State's instructional hours? How are we quantifying that? And they're like, what are you talking about? And so it goes back to that last of the 3 pillars of the Pennsylvania State Standard. And so we always had those other guidelines, but there was no institution-wide, you have to do this, you should be doing this for all your courses. So Penn State Harrisburg crafted their own, and they compiled information from other Pennsylvania institutions such as Duquesne, Shippensburg, Lebanon Valley, Immaculata, Misericordia, and Point Park. And then from there, we decided to do a working group, but at the same time, Carmen Strand, who's a World Campus instructional designer, for the courses that she was covering, she found that there was perceptions of rigor that were not aligned. And so she said, hey, focus on the readings. How much time should be spent on readings and how fast do students do? So she did some research according to that. And we combined efforts to create a university-wide estimate as far as the time for each. We did testing and examples, and the final one is on that web learning resource. So they're grounded. We also compared the final results to our Big Ten Academic Alliance courses, such as especially Purdue and University of Michigan. And there are some other ones, such as American Public University and Rice, who has done some great work in this area. So as far as the demo, this is a Marketing 310 course. And this particular instructor had created a completely online course where she gave some text narrative from her perspective. She also had instructor created videos. So we were able to work and create a video for their head librarian at Penn State Wilkes-Barre about fake news, and then some general resources that were found on the internet through YouTube, etc. And then lastly, to add some interactivity, she also, in addition to traditional discussion boards, did a voice thread discussion board. So for this example, they had to analyze press releases. So they were taught what is a good press release, what is a bad press release, and they had to analyze mediocre press releases and highlight which aspects were good and which aspects could use some improvement. So before we go in the demo, we just want to see either now or as part of COVID, what resources, what types of instructional activities have you done? And you could answer multiple ones. And what we're going to be doing is doing this through polling annotation. So right now at the top of my screen, you should see a green bar that says you are viewing Amy Kuntz's screen. Next to that, I want you to click on View Options. And then from there, click on Annotate. Then a pop-up bar is going to appear, and you can click on the stamp tool, and you could use any stamp, whether it's a heart, a star, a checkbox, and place your stamp to your answer. So again, we want to select all the choices, and to get to this, you want to press the green bar where it says use, or you're viewing Amy Kuntz's screen. Next to that, press the black bar that says View Options, then click Annotate, and then choose the stamp and go forward with that. So we'll give it a couple seconds. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. And what I will also do before I clear everything out is capture some of your results to send that out to everyone. So some of the trends, it seems like text-based resources and instructor-created video, even more so, I think more so than non-instructor created video. So that's fantastic. So thank you for sharing. And those are all some great ways to go ahead and interact with your students and giving them that instructional knowledge. So I'm unfortunately going to clear all of the wonderful annotations that you did, but thank you for that. And going forward, again, we will demo the hours of instructional activity. So this will be a little bit tiny. I'm going to try my best just to make sure that as big as possible. So what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and share my entire screen. And I ask that if anyone is in the text chat, any questions appear. If I miss them, please let me know. So right here, I have the course, and let me zoom in here a little bit more, is we're gonna compare what was done. So she has multiple weeks, of course, but we're gonna be focusing on week 6. So kind of just quickly going over and looking at her course. As you can see, this is her perspective of giving it some context. It has outside resources in those videos. In addition, she also has the instructor created videos, which is a series about fake news. And then some additional information as far as other places to go. And then with that, she wants to make sure that they get some self-assessment. And so they have a chapter 6 quiz and a chapter 7 quiz. And from there, some discussion and homework. So what does this look like in the hours of instructional activity? So first and foremost, we have the readings in the textbook. So for hers, it's more of a popular reading instead of a research. So if on that splash page that was shown, it was there, but within the Excel spreadsheet tool, it is here as well. So if you scroll down, it has the readings is 3 minutes per page for the popular reading.
Amy, Nancy is asking in the chat if you could go back a level, and how did you get to the page in Canvas that you got to?
So this is, I'm enrolled in her course, and so the example that's available is only the spreadsheet. So I'm going to work with this individual to see if they're willing to share it and make it available. But if they're not, we're going to create the example of having a Canvas space that's available to everyone and the equivalency. So that was brought up as a suggestion yesterday, and we'll certainly accommodate that. So with this demo, at least, as part of the demo in this recording, you'll be able to see what is done over here. So with that being said, the chapters is reading chapter 6 and 7. So we quantified the pages, and then we did 3 minutes per page times 20 pages is about 60 minutes. And then from there, it was converted to hours. So 60 minutes is easy, but you sometimes have to do the math if it's not a perfect amount of time. So then for there as well is even reading this page in Canvas takes some time. So what was done is this was copied and pasted in a Word document, and it turned out to be this whole thing was about 3 pages. So this in itself took students 9 minutes. The one thing that this tool is not perfect and not everything is given. So another thing is to review the PowerPoint. And so she gave some text-based information there. And so she decided after conversations that we said, hey, 3 slides is about 1 page in a Word document. So it makes it easy because you divide by 3 and then times it by 3. So we just moved it over. 30 slides is 30 minutes. So that's it for readings, but what about viewings and other things of that nature? So those are a one-to-one relationship. So something like this, you could see is 5 minutes. So that's on the dot, and we did that over. And so you could have it be granular and do this for every single video. But 2, this fake news was a series. So there's 5 different videos. And so we could have granularly said this first one is 1 minute and 7 seconds. That the second one is 1 minute and 7 seconds as well. But what was decided is to combine them all just for time's sake, where the total was 7 minutes and 55 seconds. So again, kind of doing the math is then converting minutes into hours. It's a little bit of a granular aspect but it is useful to make sure that it's 100% accurate of what you're doing. Sarah, when we get to her in a little bit, is going to go over a more generalized approach. And so that way you could choose if you want a more specific, accurate approach, which is more time consuming, or a more generalized approach, which can help you get most of the way there and is certainly less time consuming. So I know that there's something in the chat, but I do want to wrap this up. So I'll go through these last little bits. So we have these quizzes, and if you look at the other tab, that actually is recommended to be about an hour. And then as well as discussion and homework assignments is about an hour. So once you put all of those things in, it calculates it for you. And it says for this particular week, you're about 9.826 of a 9-hour target. And so you're not gonna have everything be perfect each and every week. But it's good to be close. So you don't want to be 3 hours of 9 hours, and you don't want it to be 14 hours of 9 hours. You kind of want it to be consistent each week, especially knowing that many times students always have a challenging week right before Thanksgiving break. You want to have it be kind of standard throughout. And so if you do this for each week, you could see that we were very honest when she went through this, and this was used as a tool for her to improve her course. So she has now since changed it. So she was a little bit low of 105. And even this last week is because they were trying to wrap things up and she wanted to make sure that they had enough time for their final project. But she's like, you know what, I really should add more content to here. So she went ahead and made sure that they did that accordingly. So that is how you kind of go through step by step on a granular level, but it's really hard to know what to do until you actually go through and do it. I know that it's not a Canvas course example, but we do have a text-based Word example that we will be doing as part of our next breakout group. So before I get to that part, it says Canvas. So it looks like a page is an overview for the week that explains everything and has the embedded learning objects. Yes, that's correct. So this faculty member created this course without an instructional designer at first. And so she was able to she wanted everything on kind of one succinct page versus multiple pages in a module. Correct, yep, so they could read everything. And when working with an instructional designer to help, instead of it being like one long narrative, it was broken down a little bit into like an introduction, what to read, the learning from the instructor, and then followed up with what practice do they have, and then what assessments do they have. So how would you split up time for work on a term paper per week? Great question. And it's kind of up for interpretation. So what I typically have done when working with a faculty member for this is kind of, if it's a 3-week project, in a perfect world, students would space out their work and do probably hopefully equal amounts over those three weeks. But if you know that you're giving a lot of assignments the first week, so it's just to start a little bit, then maybe adjust accordingly. Great question. So what we will be doing next, let me stop sharing and share that specific scenario, is putting you into your second breakout group. And so what we're going to do is have you solve a fake scenario. And so it's a fictitious blended class lesson where they have to do pre-class work of readings, a video, an assignment. They meet for 1.25 hours on a Thursday, and then they do some post-class work as far as an assignment and assessment. So what we want you to do is to use the basic version of the template to calculate the time. And if you think it's going to be on track for those 9 hours, the magical 9 hours. We know that everything is not perfect, but I want to go back and show you for time's sake. I'll actually go into one that doesn't have any members. Is now I want you to skip down to, once you're put into groups, I'll post the link again in the chat of how to get to this. but you have a fictitious blended week. And so with that, it has kind of the narrative of what was done pre-class, what they should have read, again, some instructional text-based content, as well as some videos. Images were stripped just to keep it simplistic. And then lastly, towards the end, it was what activities to do before class of a discussion board. And then after attending class, what activities needed to be done by the end of the week. So again, time's sake, we want to be cognizant of time. So we have the basic version of the template to refer to for those hours. And it opens up. And so if you're saying, hey, how much time for a discussion board? What you can do is scroll and find it here. But we want you to go as a group and fill out the rest of this table. So we did some of the calculations for you as far as readings. So you only have to do one of the calculations of 34 pages to do a little bit of the math. And so some of the viewings are here too, but we want to have some discussion as far as how many hours should a discussion board be? How many hours for the case study? How many hours for the assessment? So what we will challenge to have a group reporter, not a group leader, is we're gonna report out to see, hey, do you think it's too much? Is it too little or just right? So the 3 Bears reference with Goldilocks as far as with the course, is that magical? Is it close to that magical 9 hours? Is it way over? Is it way under? So with that being said, I'm going to post the link again as far as to how to get to the Google Docs or the appropriate breakout rooms. And I will go ahead and ask Pome, our great tech TA, to put you in those breakout groups, and we'll have about 12 minutes. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much. And so we want to report out and see what your answer was in relation to each other. So as was mentioned, you should hopefully have had a group leader. And so for each group leader, you should see at the top of the screen, you are viewing Amy Kuntz's screen. And next to that, if you click on View Options, then you should see Annotate. And then instead of the stamp tool, there's a text tool that looks like a T. And so if you do that and then click on the PowerPoint slide for that specific row for your group, what you do is you type a response and then click outside of that box. And then only once you click outside of it, then it will appear. So we'd love to hear what you thought. And I know it might be a little bit tiny, but we're just trying to keep it simplistic. So I'll be able to read it to the rest of the group. So group 3 had 8.5, group 2, 9.543. So kind of just right. And we'll see what group 1 did, hopefully in a minute or so. So again, if we click on, you're viewing Amy Kuntz's screen, and then click View Options, and then click on Annotate, and then click on the text, which is the T. Group 3 rounded, that's perfect. Great. So I think just for simplicity's sake, maybe if group 1 is having issues, if you want to type in the chat, we can as well. It's easier to do. Oh, there we go, pretty close, a little over 9, perfect. You're playing around with the size of the text to make it visible for everyone. So thank you. So everyone was pretty much in agreement. So I think for that, it's kind of that just right. So we want to be cognizant of time, and I did not clear the annotations. So sorry about that. Actually, let me go back and clear them. And so we want to quickly give you about a 5-minute break. So it is 3:17. So we'll come back at 3:22. So in case you do have to step away, get a drink, quickly go away and come back. What we will be doing is still kind of talking candidly here, but please feel free to step away and we'll get started back up at 3:22. So we will still record this part of the discussion. Is there anything else that we could talk about? So the one thing that we also are going to mention and share is yesterday, as far as visualizing aspects, somebody mentioned about the infographic syllabus. And so I actually have a presentation that I have done as far as that is concerned. And so I'm not going to go over into too much details, but I can show that a little bit. But in the meantime, Tia has a question. Is there any information on how long it takes students to complete different types of questions? Multiple choice essay, etc. So this is kind of a gray area. There is some research that it should be about 1 minute per multiple choice question, but especially if you work with Schreier, the Institute for Teaching Excellence, a lot of people were saying, hey, okay, that's it. I want to use that for academic integrity. We have to know that our students right now are stressed. They're not in their typical environments, even in the fall semester. So they're with that trauma-infused pedagogy, as well as ideally, they probably won't just be on the computer. They might have to take care of siblings, things of that nature. It's recommended to be a little bit more lenient for that. And I know that there's been some backlash by students saying, hey, I had to take a class where they only did 1 minute per question. And so I think Chris Brua had some more research as far as upping it more, especially for this time of year. So yeah, I know that they have a little bit more information for that. So there's a historical context as well as the current situation. Great question. Okay. So any other questions before I go ahead and do the little mini session to give some context about what we are going to share as a resource? Okay, so what I will do is share my screen again. This is not part of the formal presentation. And I know this is super tiny, but you'll be able to get a copy of this and see it. So somebody said about that visual nature, how do we convey the time that students do visually to our students? And so the infographic syllabus is one way to do that. And so this is an accounting professor who was at Penn State Greater Allegheny and has since now teaches at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So this would be in addition to your traditional syllabus. And so she used a tool called Canva, not Canvas, but Canva, C-A-N-V-A, to create this. And they had a template for infographic syllabus. So what she did is she had her office hours, her course description, she visualized her 6 objectives, and then from there, her course was blended in nature. So she said, hey, each week, you have to do items before class, that pre-module, and then it was what to do during class, and then what to do after class. And then from there, she did her 15 weeks, 1 module per week, kind of, hey, what's the topic? And then lastly, grading. So accountants, not everyone who takes Accounting 211 is going to be an accountant. They might be in general business, etc. And maybe from your experiences, you've seen that students sometimes don't know how much a certain portion of their grade is worth, even though you tell them in percentages. So this visual form really helps to convey that to our students. So Greater Allegheny being a mix of a commuter and resident campus, the ones who were living in the dorms actually printed it out and had it on their wall. And the ones who were commuters printed it out and had it in their binders. So she didn't do any prompting. She just said, hey, here it is. And they really liked that a lot more so. And so this was one of the sessions at TLT Symposium about 2 years ago, if you did attend the summer series today. So we will be sharing this out as a resource if you are interested in something like this to visualize it. So with that being said, back to kind of our regularly scheduled programming as far as our session on hours of instructional activity. And it is now 3:23, so we are back from break. So going back to the reference of, but wait, there's even more. So I know, as you see, that the hours of instructional activity, even the basic template of Excel, takes time. And so knowing that you have a lot of added responsibilities with the current situation, we want to be cognizant of your time. And Sarah has been working on a great tool to kind of be that middle ground. So I will let Sarah introduce herself and take it away with the HIA Estimator web app.
Thank you, Amy. And do you want to stop screen sharing so I can, thank you. Okay, let me just get that set up. Okay, hey everybody. So I'm Sarah. I am a student intern at Harrisburg campus's Center for Teaching Excellence. So I work with instructional designers, but I am also a computer science major and sociology minor. So when I first started interning at the center, one of my main projects was to take that hours of instructional activity and, as Amy said, kind of build an app that you guys can use more easily, more quickly, to kind of get a broader overview of your course plan, the activities you plan to incorporate into it, and visualize some of that. So I'll be showing you that today. A slight disclaimer, it's still in demo mode, but I'll be able to share the link. You guys can still try the demo out and all of that after. We plan to have it out in time to utilize for the fall semester though. Okay, with that said, let's just jump in and take a look at it. So one thing you'll notice is in the documentation, there's a lot of activities, and to try to make that easier to navigate through, I kind of categorize them into like logical categories. So we've got writing, reading, and watching, communication, that type of thing. In writing, you'll see discussion activities, reflection papers, research papers, that sort of a thing. And instead of for the spreadsheet, which was focused on details of the different activities themselves, I tried to do just like an overview. So instead of having to worry about all those little things, we'll just say the number of discussions we're going to have. So say 4, they're going to be reading. So you just fill in these very simple, short little fields, and we'll add some readings in here. And as you'll see, as I'm adding these to the right, do a couple of these. There we go. To the right here, we're getting automatic visualization in the graph. We can see how the categories are balancing out across the course, and we can also see how our estimated hours are evening out, how our estimated hours are being calculated. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to finish by adding a few other things here so we can see how all the categories work. So we've got a lot of group project. Now, one of the challenges that I face, because this is a broad overview, is while you're looking at the spreadsheets, you can kind of see and work through how many hours something might be worth, depending on the specifics. Whereas in this case, for a group project, you can't really get that specific. So I kind of broke it down to small, medium, large. So I'll just say this one's medium to get the even. And it just took the different averages within those ranges. And a couple of tests. Oops, there you go. And then down here, I also added a custom activity, because although we've got over 20 activity types, there are definitely going to be things you might want to include in your course that aren't going to fit into a standard box. So in that case, we've got the custom activity, and this one's a little different because for this, you're going to estimate your own instructional time, so the time that you're spending with the students, guiding them in some way, and then the student learning time as well. So I'm just going to say for this assignment, it's going to take me 1 hour, and then the students will probably spend about 3 hours on it. So now that everything's entered in here, we can go back up and we can get a pretty good overview of how the class is looking. And with the estimations down here, you can also see the recommendations. And these are the recommended hours that Amy covered earlier, along with a breakdown of per week. Now, this is based on the length of your course and the number of credits. So to make the math a little easier for you, you can just enter that in up here. So I'm going to change this to a 10-week course, and we'll say knock the credits down to 2. And then when you come back down, that's automatically adjusted these. So it makes the math easier. You just kind of can see the results. You can play around with it, adjust as needed, and then you can always move into the more detailed spreadsheets after. Also, if there's something in here that you want to see how everything balances out without it, you can also click anything. So let's say I want to remove my other activity. Click that, and it automatically removes it. However, the information I entered in is still there. The calculations stay the same. This is purely for the visual chart, so you can get a feel quite quickly. So with that, there is a lot going on here. And maybe you know that in your course, you're not going to have any journal entries or blog entries. You can just remove them like that. Now, as long as you don't put any numbers or change anything on the activities, they will not be factored into your estimates. So don't worry, you don't have to count, remove them. But if you do want to clean it up, that's a nice little feature. And in the similar way, you can also add more activities. So for example, let's say that I'm going to have a research paper that is 5 pages. And then maybe I'm going to have another research paper. I'll just click that. You got a visual cue down here. And then it's automatically popped back up into the category. So now I'm going to have another research paper, and this one's 10 pages. So this just really lets you customize it quickly. And you can add as many as you need, remove as many as you need. That said, that's still a fair amount of work, and you might want to save it and come back later to it or share it with somebody else. So to do that, we scroll down here. Because this is going to be a web app, so it's just going to be on a web page, you're not going to be logging in. You can't easily save and come back to it. There's no account involved. So instead, what I did was you can export your data. So I'm just going to click that here. And when you click it, it will automatically download a file. It's just a text file. The text is not meant to be read or used or changed. It's just the data for the app. It's going to look like code. It's JSON, if any of you are familiar with that. But you can change the name of the file. You can store it however you want, and then you can send it to somebody else. So if you're working with an instructional designer or a faculty member, you can send it to them. They can bring it up, and I'll just refresh this so I can show you how it works when it's imported. But that way they can edit it, and then they can export their own version and send that back to you. So you can kind of have an iterative build on your course in this app, which I think is kind of nice. And now I'm just going to import. And when you click import, a little box will pop up. You can just select your file, click open, and everything is automatically right back in there. And that includes anything that you have deleted or added. So that is the basics that the app can do. That should cover, I think that's basically all the features. And so I'll tell you how you can get here. So while it's in demo mode, we do have a page up on Web Learning right now. You can access the demo. You can give us some feedback, please do. I'm still working on this. If there's anything you want added, anything that would be helpful, any problems you have, let me know. And I'm definitely taking feedback and trying to work that in as I go. As well as some how-to tips. So everything I've shown you now, don't worry, when you're in there and playing with it on your own, you can come back here and find the steps there and some frequently asked questions. And I'll be posting this in the chat. But I hope that this is helpful for you all and give you an alternative option to kind of use with the other tools to see how your hours are working. I'm going to give this back to Amy.
Great, thank you. So I think this is a great way to have it be kind of that middle ground. And as you see, as you saw on the screen, the nice feature is there also is that graphical aspect. And so referring back to the infographic kind of sidebar portion, the talk was to maybe even take this pie chart and put that even in the syllabus form to visualize it. And then lastly, the nice part is the scaffolding. So with the research papers, having one that's 5 pages and one that's 10 pages, if you don't have time and just want to say, hey, it's going to be 2 with about 7 pages, you can do that. But if you want to take that time to say, hey, the first one is only going to be 3, then 7, then 10. It helps that scaffolded approach. So one question that we have kind of in general is from Laura is, if the case study is done in class, does it count as 1 hour for instruction? So from a pedagogical instructional design perspective, I would count that as the class time. So I wouldn't even necessarily list it as the case study. I would count that as synchronous class time because that's quantifiable. It's however long you meet. And so with the HII estimator tool, that's where that other category kind of comes into play as far as the custom activities, saying, hey, we are meeting for class, it's X amount of time for there. So is there any other questions before we move on? No?
Thank you for catching the chat questions. I lose my chat box as soon as I share my screen.
Yeah, I do as well. So our final aspect today is focusing on homework overload briefly and why. So as was mentioned, so one question, sorry, can we adapt this tool for students to self-report their hours? I think that's a great idea. So I don't know, Sarah, you've done this presentation, that part of the demo to other groups. Has that come about yet?
No, that's the first time that's actually been brought up. That would be an interesting way to use it, actually. If you do choose to do that, please let me know how that goes. And if you have any questions about how to use it in that way, get in contact with me.
Yeah,
I'd love to talk about that.
That's great. Thank you. We'd love to hear that. Yeah, change the categories a little bit. Yeah, but again, that even other, you could do many of those other categories as well. Perfect. So segueing back to avoiding homework overload. Again, when you typically move to, yeah, so I think maybe we'll do that, editing the base, we'll do that kind of towards the end, not to go too much off topic. Great, thank you. So as far as avoiding homework and why, again, when you move to, especially to blended learning and courses, there is that unintentional aspect of typically moving towards the course and a half. And so how do you prevent that? And in addition, although there has been research done at Penn State and elsewhere, not focusing on the homework overload piece, there have been self-reporting and the open-ended comments that there have been, they feel with the movement to remote instruction for the spring, that they got a lot of additional homework that wasn't previously on the syllabus, and it was because they weren't meeting as much in person, and the amount that was given to them was not equitable and fair. So through that informal feedback, we want to address the importance to go back to a course is a course is a course. So when you meet over Zoom, it's just like meeting in person, so you shouldn't add more homework. And then lastly, what is here is the awareness of the homework gap. So this was taken after COVID-19 and the digital divide. The amount of internet access minimum and the usage has actually decreased. So the government minimum standard is less than 25 megabytes is the threshold. So I didn't zoom into Pennsylvania because it would make it super granular, but I'm going to post the link in the chat. As many of our students, even if they were able to provide internet for themselves before, with the challenging fiscal aspects, it has even decreased. And so with that, you could even see that a majority portion of Pennsylvania and the Poconos, even in University Park, and kind of in the Altoona Harrisburg area, they aren't having the adequate bandwidth necessary for doing homework that is needed to utilize the internet in a meaningful manner. So other ways for how to actually avoid homework overload: we don't want students to be doing homework at night and during the day. We want them to have that magical stress level of not being super stressed and unsure, but we want them to not have them be completely engaged and confident. We want that magical state of flow where they are challenged, but it's yet doable. So having that middle ground is perfect, that just right. So As we discussed today, there is that HIA Excel tool, which documents each week in the more granular aspect, but there is the general tool that we also will be sending out as a follow-up if you didn't click on it in the chat. And then some other things are the things that we mentioned in the beginning. You could have a beta student, have a test student to kind of go through. If it's the first time you're offering a course, make sure it's someone who doesn't know your discipline, that is kind of a novice, because oftentimes we say students could go through stuff faster than actually what they could do. And then two, incorporate it as part of your evaluation of your course and getting that student feedback. So oftentimes there's a mid-semester survey that can be done saying how many hours did you spend on this week per course, and have a multiple choice question. If you give them ranges, they often tend to be honest, and it's usually not the 9 hours. They usually report that it's closer to about 6. Do assignment wrappers. So if you have a large project such as that case study and it's done outside of class time, have the last question to be like, hey, how much time did you spend on this case study? And have them report it out. And so stress that it's not going to be part of their grade, but just to make sure that you're the reason why you're collecting that data, and they're more apt to self-report it. And to along with that, Schreier Institute for Teaching Excellence, it's a little bit dated now, but they've done research in the past that oftentimes when you do a mid-semester survey and you have conversations about what you're doing with that, so if you see, hey, students aren't spending enough time, and what you're doing to help encouraging them to do that, or if they said, hey, this course is too hard, and what you're doing to tweak it to meet their expectations, they're more apt to take the SRTE for you. They're more apt to give you higher SRTE ratings, as well as give you more open-ended feedback. And then lastly is candid conversation. So just having building that rapport with your students and having them kind of say, how's it going? How's the course? Was it too much work, too little, for the assignment granular aspects? And then once you have some of that data, as you could make it aware for your students. So oftentimes students are not necessarily aware of the rigor that is expected for them. And so having something within a syllabus statement, or having a dialogue with students during the first week of classes to say how much time expectation is expected for your course. With the dialogue, it's always great to have quotes from previous students to hear what was expected and learning in hindsight. Then the other thing is manage the disconnect between perceptions of rigor and allowing students time to process that information. So going back to the example of the one faculty member who said, hey, the students thought it should have been only 6 hours a week because their earlier classes were as such. So making sure that saying, hey, this is an upper level course, or one's in a particular discipline, getting your colleagues on board, similar to trying to get them on board with a similar educational technology throughout all their coursework. And lastly, I know it was mentioned, somebody said about flipped classrooms towards the beginning, if that counted as blended. Oftentimes when you move to blended, you are doing a flipped classroom approach where you take the lecture and move it outside of the class time, and then you do more active learning in class. So research has shown that students actually prefer lecture because they just want to sit and consume that information, but there's greater learning gains if flipped classrooms are done. So making sure that they're aware that, hey, with flipped classrooms, it's the same amount of time, because often they perceive that to be more time that they have to spend. So with this, as far as engaging in conversations, I did say about the syllabus statement, and I'll give you an example in the next slide, but even you could have a syllabus quiz where they have to get 100% and there's a question saying how much time is expected in this course, and they have to answer 9 hours each week. And then once they get a perfect on that syllabus quiz, then they get access to the rest of the Canvas course using Canvas module prerequisites. I already talked about the beginning of the course and what to do, but some other ones is the dialogue during the course. If you have an exam wrapper instead of an assignment wrapper saying, hey, how much time did you spend on this course each week? Did you do the readings? And then if that correlates to, hey, if they did it the hours that were expected and they get an A, but the ones who didn't ended up getting an F, you could say, hey, you're supposed to be spending so much time studying. But if they see that in practice and realization of their peers, they're more likely to prepare more appropriately for that second exam. And then lastly, as the other thing, which is you could even use the SRTE results to help influence kind of dialogue and discussion. So I said I was going to do a syllabus statement. I'm warning you that it's super tiny font to get it all on the slide. I'm going to read highlights of it, but we are sending out these slides most likely tomorrow morning as a follow-up. So this is a hybrid example. For those who are here from Penn State Berks, you might recognize this. So I have done it when I was there as well. But explaining that this is a hybrid course, but it's meaningful for any modality. Is actually even referencing the Penn State Senate policy, saying this is in compliance with Standard 42-23. So that last line for a 3-credit course, it equates to 3 formal hours and 6 hours of outside preparation each week. So for a blended course that I had done, we didn't have this initially, and then there was some student aspects saying, hey, this course is too rigorous, I'm spending way too much time on it. But they self-reported they were only spending 6 hours, or 7 hours. So by having this and setting that expectation, they're like, oh, okay, like we're getting there. And they didn't consider when this is done in 4-credit courses, hey, it's not just 9 hours, it's even more so. So having that be upfront and forward has been useful. So we are approaching 3:45 and we have one last activity before we wrap things up. So we're asking you to have a group leader to take notes in the Google Doc and then have everyone share one idea for hours of instructional activity implementation and one challenge. And then when you're done, we're going to come back and the group leader will share these out in this spreadsheet. So before our wonderful tech TA sends you out, I do want to post the link to all the wonderful links in the chat in case you closed out your browser window. So that's in the chat. And go ahead and join your breakout rooms. Okay, everyone, welcome back one final time. We'd like to hear from you. So again, you're supposed to have a group note taker and sharer. So if you are that person, one final time, if you see you are viewing Amy Kuntz's screen, if you click on view options and then annotate, and then there is a text tool that looks like a T. And so then if you could type in your designated row, what ideas you had and what challenges you had. In mind for the hours of instructional activity implementation. And so while that is being done, Ryan, you had a great question. As far curious to know thoughts about keeping remote and in-person assignments the same, if it might be longer at home than on campus due to access and quality of internet, especially simulations. Historically, so even, I worked at a community college coming prior to Penn State, and so even in the Poconos, they tend to not have as much bandwidth than other areas in the region. And so it was trying to say, hey, you err on the side a little bit more so towards the giving even quantifying that it took a little bit more time. Now, what is said is it's the average, taking the average student. So it might be that they spend a little bit more time because they don't have the time the resources at home, but we don't want to disenfranchise them and have them at a disadvantage. So I will tend to lean towards that way. The other thing, so I know. So you can change the font when you click on the T. You can change it to be like 14-point font. I'm going just to keep it simplistic. We didn't do that, and I'm going to make sure I read every response. So thank you for that. But going back to Ryan, one model, and I don't know necessarily what models Penn State are doing. It's called HighFlex, and so Brian Beatty has been doing this work for a while. And interestingly, I don't know if we have anyone here from Lehigh Valley. So Penn State Lehigh Valley has done HighFlex for a few years, and they've actually went away from that about 2 years ago. The Smale College of Business has done HighFlex for Accounting 211, that students have the choice of taking the course online or in person. And so that model kind of outlines how to make sure that doing work in person equates to the same amount of time as doing the work online for each class session, not even at a grand level of a course level or a week level, but each class session. So his book on HighFlex, Brian Beatty, I did put in the chat. So knowing that to be cognizant of time, some of the ideas and challenges include the ideas want students to self-assess and report to us how much time they spent on various class activities. Use the web app, so Sarah, the one that Sarah's creating, for students to self-report, put policy in the syllabus. Use the chart reference to estimate for our own courses. And then the last idea of using this to plan for fall, since we have some students in person, some remote, keeping things equitable. Challenges is how do we handle flipped classes in the mixed mode? And maybe the Brian Beatty's book of HighFlex can help with that. How does this work for your best students versus others? And again, it's that middle ground of most students in that language, the majority. And then we have some overlap. So I'll type this out as a follow-up, is the access to computers, the high-speed internet. So I know that IT, again, just like in the spring, is making sure that students have access to computers, if they need internet, to have those hotspots and rent it out and things of that nature. So unfortunately, I am gonna clear all these wonderful annotations, but I did save it, and I will, as promised as a follow-up, I will type them out. So we have 1 minute left. So tips and practice to take things away. Take it a course at a time, focus on one course and the lessons learned to apply it to another course. Focus on the added value for you and your students. And then when discussing with students, provide some clear examples as to what you did and why, to show them that yes, you took the time to quantify that. So to wrap things up, I do want to take the time and say thank you for attending today. Again, we're right on time perfectly, but we will be sending you to the breakout groups one final time in case you want to wrap up conversations. And what I will also be posting is, now that you have been signed up for the ESS series, you will be getting information about future sessions. And if you want to peek, this link will be updated from time to time as the new sessions are announced this summer, including the repeat later on. So thank you for joining us today. And lastly is feedback is a gift. Again, this is the first time we are doing this series. So please fill out the Qualtrics survey form as how we did today, as well as give insight as to what other topics you want covered in future sessions. So with that, go ahead. Who was that?
No, that was me. I was just saying thank you very much. It was very helpful.
Great, thank you. I greatly appreciate it. So again, I will be sticking around, but I'll be putting you in breakout groups in case you want to talk to one another one last time, and you could leave from there. So thank you, everyone.